David had never planned to be an absent father. 5 years ago, he was struggling to make ends meet in the small town of Pine Creek after his wife left them both for a new life in the city. The small two-bedroom house they once shared now felt hollow, filled only with memories and mounting bills. Each morning he would wake before sunrise, prepare a simple breakfast for his 4-year-old daughter Lily, and drop her off at the neighbor's house before rushing to his first job at the local hardware store. "Daddy, when will you be back?" Lily would ask every morning, her small hands clutching the worn teddy bear she carried everywhere. "Before the stars come out," David would promise, kissing the top of her head before heading off to work. But some nights, when his second shift at the warehouse ran late, the stars would already be sprinkled across the night sky by the time he picked her up. On those nights, he'd carry his sleeping daughter home, her head resting against his shoulder, and feel a weight in his chest heavier than any box he'd lifted that day. Despite working 2 jobs, David could barely keep the lights on. The refrigerator often stood half empty, and the pile of past due notices grew taller on the kitchen counter. He started skipping meals to make sure Lily had enough to eat. His belt notched tighter with each passing month. "You're looking thin, David," his neighbor Mrs. Chen said one evening when he came to pick up Lily. "Are you eating enough?" "Just been busy," he replied with a forced smile, avoiding her concerned gaze. Mrs. Chen, a widow in her 60s who had raised 3 children of her own, wasn't fooled. The next day, she sent a container of homemade soup with Lily. "For your daddy," she instructed the little girl. That night, as David sat at the kitchen table with Lily, watching her carefully eat her macaroni and cheese, he opened Mrs. Chen's container. The warm smell of chicken soup filled their small kitchen, and for a moment he felt a lump in his throat. Kind gestures had become rare in his life. "Daddy, why are you crying?" Lily asked, her fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Just happy," David said, quickly wiping his eyes. "Mrs. Chen makes really good soup." Later that night, after tucking Lily into bed and reading her favorite story about a rabbit who found his way home, David sat at the kitchen table with a notepad, calculating his expenses once again. No matter how he moved the numbers around, they wouldn't add up. The medical bills from Lily's ear infection last month had wiped out what little savings he had left. His phone buzzed with a text message from his cousin Rick, who had moved to Wyoming 2 years ago. "Construction company here hiring. Starting pay 28 hour with overtime. They're desperate for workers. Think about it." David stared at the message for a long time. The pay was nearly 3 times what he made at the hardware store. With overtime, he could finally start paying off his debts and save for Lily's future. But Wyoming was almost 1,000 miles away. The next morning, David called his wife's parents, Tom and Betty, who lived just outside of town. Despite the bitter divorce, they had always adored Lily and visited her regularly. "I need to ask you something important," David said when Betty answered the phone. That weekend, David drove Lily to her grandparents' tidy brick house with the white picket fence and colorful flower garden that Lily loved to help tend. "We need to have a grown-up talk." "Sweetheart," David said as they sat on the porch swing, Lily's legs dangling above the ground. "Am I in trouble?" Lily asked, her blue eyes wide with concern. No, David assured her, taking her small hand in his. "You remember how Daddy has been working really hard to take care of us?" Lily nodded, her ponytail bobbing with the movement. "Well, I found a job that will help us a lot, but it's very far away. I would need to go there for a while to earn money, and you would stay here with Grandma and Grandpa. Can I come with you?" Lily's lower lip trembled. David felt as if someone had reached into his chest and squeezed his heart. "Not right away. Where I'll be staying isn't nice enough for my princess. But I'll call you every day, and before you know it, I'll have enough money to get us a better place, and you can come live with me again." "How long is a while?" Lily asked, her young mind trying to grasp the concept of time. "Just until Christmas," David said, though he wasn't entirely sure. 6 months seemed like a reasonable goal to save enough for a fresh start. The following week was a blur of preparations. David sold most of their furniture and his old truck, keeping only Lily's bedroom set, which he moved to her grandparents' house. He packed 2 suitcases, one with his clothes and another with mementos he couldn't bear to leave behind, including photos of Lily from birth to present day. On his last night in Pine Creek, David lay on the floor of their empty house using his duffel bag as a pillow. Sleep evaded him as doubts crept in like the shadows stretching across the bare walls. Was he making a terrible mistake? What kind of father leaves his child behind? It's temporary, he whispered to himself in the darkness. This is for her. All of this is for her. The morning of his departure arrived with gray skies and a light drizzle that matched David's mood. At his in-laws' house, he hugged Lily tightly, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo, trying to memorize the feeling of her small arms around his neck. I'll call you tonight when I get there, he promised, his voice thick with emotion. Don't forget Benny, Lily said, pressing her teddy bear into his hands. So you won't be lonely. David nodded, unable to speak past the knot in his throat. He placed the teddy bear carefully in his jacket pocket, with its head peeking out. Look after her, David said to Tom and Betty, who stood solemnly by the door. Despite their differences, they could see the agony in David's eyes, the doubt and self-recrimination already haunting him. She'll be waiting for you when you get back, Betty assured him, her hand on Lily's shoulder. With one last wave, David climbed onto the bus that would take him to the first of 3 connections on his journey west. As the bus pulled away, he kept his eyes fixed on Lily's small figure standing by the mailbox, her arm raised in farewell, until the bus turned the corner and she disappeared from view. The journey to Wyoming took nearly 2 days, with long layovers and dusty bus stations where David sat clutching Benny the bear, already missing his daughter with an ache that felt physical. He sent Lily a postcard from each stop, writing in big letters so she could practice reading them herself. When he finally arrived at the construction site, a massive commercial development on the outskirts of a growing city, David was assigned a bed in a cramped dormitory-style housing unit shared with 7 other workers. The space was smaller than Lily's bedroom back home, with just enough room for a narrow bed and a metal locker for his belongings. That night, bone-tired from travel and emotion, David called the number Betty had given him. When Lily came on the line, her excited voice describing her day at preschool and the butterflies she had seen in the garden, David closed his eyes and could almost imagine he was sitting beside her. When are you coming home, Daddy? She asked before hanging up. Soon, David promised, staring at the cracked ceiling above his bunk. I'll be home before you know it. As he drifted off to sleep that first night away from his daughter, David kept one hand on Benny the bear, tucked beside his pillow. The job would be hard, the hours long and the separation painful, but he held on to one thought that made it all bearable. Every hour worked, every dollar saved, was bringing him one step closer to giving Lily the life she deserved. What David didn't know then, as exhaustion finally pulled him into a restless sleep, was that his 6-month plan would stretch far beyond his imagination, and the road back to his daughter would be longer and more winding than the 1,000 miles he had just traveled. The first few months of David's new job in Wyoming passed in a blur of early mornings and late nights. His hands, once soft from stocking shelves at the hardware store, grew calloused and strong. His skin darkened under the relentless sun as he worked on the growing skeleton of what would become a shopping mall. Every Sunday, his only day off, he walked 3 miles to the nearest library to video call Lily at her grandparents' house. Look, Daddy, I lost a tooth, Lily would exclaim, pointing to the gap in her smile that hadn't been there the week before. Each new milestone he missed felt like a small knife in his heart. That's wonderful, sweetheart. Did the tooth fairy come? David asked, trying to mask the pain in his voice with enthusiasm. Grandpa says she'll come tonight. I'm putting it under my pillow right now. David made a mental note to call Tom later and make sure the tooth fairy left the $5 bill he had mailed last week specifically for this occasion. The weekly video calls were the highlight of David's existence, the moments he lived for amid the grueling physical labor and lonely nights. But as autumn turned to winter, the calls began to change. Lily seemed more distant, less eager to talk. She'd wander away from the screen mid-conversation, distracted by toys or the cartoons playing in the background. She's adjusting, Betty told him one Sunday when Lily had run off to play with a neighborhood friend before their call was finished. It's normal at her age. Don't take it personally. But David did take it personally. How could he not? His own daughter was slipping away from him, one missed bedtime story at a time. December came, and with it, the realization that David would not be going home for Christmas as he'd promised. The construction project had fallen behind schedule due to early winter storms, and the foreman had made it clear that anyone who left for the holidays shouldn't expect a job to return to. I'm so sorry. Lily Pad, David said during their call, using the nickname that used to make her giggle. The job isn't finished yet. But I'm sending lots of presents and maybe I can come in February for your birthday instead. Lily's face framed by the tablet screen showed little disappointment. It's okay. Grandma and Grandpa are taking me to see the big Christmas tree in the city, and there's going to be real reindeer. Her excitement about Christmas plans that didn't include him cut deeper than her disappointment would have. That night, David sat on the edge of his narrow bed holding Benny the bear, now worn from being carried in his work bag every day. I'm losing her, he whispered to the empty room, his roommates all out at the local bar. The extra money he was making seemed hollow compared to the cost of his absence. Still, he sent half his paycheck home each month, along with care packages filled with small gifts for Lily. Coloring books, hair clips, a snow globe from a gift shop, and once, a delicate silver bracelet with a lily charm that cost him nearly a week's food budget. He added notes to each package. Daddy loves you more than all the stars in the sky, and counting down the days until I see your beautiful smile. But as winter turned to spring, and spring to summer, the responses to his gifts and letters became less frequent. The Sunday calls grew shorter, sometimes skipped entirely because Lily had a play date or was too tired after a day at the park. She's a busy little girl, Tom would explain apologetically. You know how kids are at this age. Always on the go, but David didn't know. His daughter had been 4 when he left, still taking afternoon naps and asking for help tying her shoes. Now she was 5, starting kindergarten in the fall, making friends and forming memories he wasn't part of. The construction project that was supposed to take 6 months extended to 8, then 12. Just as it was nearing completion, the company won a bid for another larger project an hour away. The foreman offered David a promotion, assistant supervisor with a significant pay raise. It meant at least another year in Wyoming, but the extra money would allow David to save more quickly. It's just a little longer, he told himself as he accepted the position. A few more months and I'll have enough for a down payment on a house back home. But a few more months turned into another year. The calls with Lily became monthly rather than weekly, partly due to David's new responsibilities that kept him working late, and partly because Lily's enthusiasm for the calls had waned to nearly nothing. Now 6 years old, she would dutifully say hello, answer his questions with one-word responses, then ask if she could go play. Does she ask about me? David asked Tom during one call after Lily had quickly excused herself. There was an uncomfortable pause before Tom replied, She keeps your picture by her bed. It wasn't an answer to his question, and they both knew it. The distance wasn't just physical anymore. A chasm had opened between David and his daughter, filled with unshared experiences and fading memories. The occasional photos Betty sent showed a growing girl with her mother's eyes and a smile David barely recognized. Not because it had changed, but because he hadn't been there to see it change. In the rare letters Lily sent, usually prompted by her grandparents, her handwriting improved from clumsy printing to neat cursive. The drawings of my family that once featured a tall figure labeled Daddy, next to a small one for me, gradually changed to pictures of a house with 3 figures. Me, Grandma, and Grandpa. David kept every letter, every drawing, pinned to the walls of whatever temporary housing he occupied, as the construction projects moved him across the state. His co-workers, mostly single men or those who had left families behind in other countries, understood his pain without needing explanations. My son was 3 when I left the Philippines, his roommate Carlo told him one evening, as David stared at a new photo of Lily at her school play. He's 12 now and I've seen him twice. It breaks your heart, but what choice do we have? At least your daughter has a good home, good schools. That's why we do this, no? David nodded, but the justifications felt thinner with each passing month. The money he sent home was building a future for Lily, but what good was a future without him in it? By the time Lily turned 7, David had been promoted again, now overseeing his own crew on a highway expansion project. The pay was excellent and his savings account was growing steadily. He'd paid off all his old debts and was putting aside money for Lily's college fund. But the emotional debt, the moments missed, the bedtime stories unread, the skinned knees unbandaged, that debt grew larger every day. The weekly video calls had become monthly phone calls, which sometimes didn't happen at all because Lily had a swim lesson or was at a friend's birthday party. When they did speak, the conversations felt forced, like talking to a polite stranger rather than his own child. "How's school, Lilypad?" he would ask, still using the nickname though she no longer responded to it. "It's fine," she would reply, her voice growing deeper, losing its childish pitch. "I got an A on my math test. That's wonderful. I'm so proud of you. What else have you been up to?" Nothing much. The silence that followed felt like a wall between them, impenetrable and growing taller with each missed moment. On Lily's 8th birthday, David called during her party, hearing children laughing in the background. She came to the phone briefly, thanked him for the art set he'd mailed, then hurried back to her friends. Later that night, Betty sent him photos from the party, Lily blowing out candles on a butterfly-shaped cake, opening presents surrounded by little girls in colorful dresses, all with their arms around each other, sharing inside jokes and friendship bracelets. In every photo, Lily was smiling, genuinely happy in a life that had found its rhythm without him. David sat on the steps outside his current housing unit, staring at those photos until his phone battery died. The beautiful little girl in the pictures was his daughter, but she was also a stranger. She had favorite foods he didn't know about, friends whose names he couldn't remember, a daily routine he couldn't picture. The gap between them seemed too wide to bridge now. That night he called Tom and Betty after Lily was in bed. "I'm thinking of coming home," he said without preamble. "I've saved enough. I can find work back there, maybe not as good, but—" "David," Tom interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. "Lily's doing well here. She's settled. She has friends, she's thriving in school. Betty and I aren't getting any younger, but we can give her stability right now. She's my daughter," David said, a defensive edge creeping into his voice. "Yes, she is," Betty said, joining the conversation. "And we've never tried to replace you. But it's been almost 4 years, David. You can't just walk back into her life and disrupt everything she knows." 4 years. The words hit David like a physical blow. It wasn't supposed to be this long. 6 months, maybe a year at most. How had he let 4 years slip away? The conversation ended with no resolution, just a heavy silence filled with unspoken accusations and regrets. That night, David couldn't sleep. He pulled out the shoebox where he kept all of Lily's letters and drawings, spreading them across his bed in chronological order. The progression was painfully clear, from "I miss you, Daddy" to formal thank you notes for gifts, from colorful pictures of the two of them holding hands to school assignments sent out of obligation. Something had to change. He'd left to give Lily a better life, but what kind of life was it without her father? The money he'd saved wouldn't mean anything if he returned to find his daughter didn't know him anymore. There. The journey back to Pine Creek felt both endless and too quick. David sat by the bus window, watching the landscape change from the rugged mountains of Wyoming to the rolling plains of the Midwest. Each mile brought him closer to Lily, yet his stomach knotted tighter with anxiety. What if she didn't want him back in her life? What if the damage of his absence couldn't be repaired? 5 years had passed since he'd left. 5 years of missed birthdays and Christmases, of school plays and lost teeth, of nightmares he wasn't there to soothe and accomplishments he couldn't celebrate in person. The weight of that time pressed on him like a physical burden. During the long bus ride, David pulled out his phone and scrolled through the photos Betty had sent over the years. Lily at 5, missing her front teeth. Lily at 6, dressed as a butterfly for Halloween. Lily at 7, holding up a blue ribbon from her science fair. Lily at 8, sitting proudly on a bicycle without training wheels. And the most recent Lily at 9, her face losing its baby roundness, her eyes holding a seriousness that reminded David of himself. The last picture Betty had sent was from 2 weeks ago. Lily sitting under a tree in the backyard, reading a book. Her long brown hair pulled back in a ponytail, her legs crossed at the ankles. She looked peaceful, content. Did he have the right to disrupt that peace? David had called Tom and Betty before leaving Wyoming, informing them of his return. The conversation had been tense, filled with unasked questions and unvoiced concerns. "We haven't told her yet," Betty admitted. "We wanted to wait until we knew for sure when you'd arrive." "Don't tell her," David had decided after a moment's thought. "I want to surprise her." Now, as the bus crossed into the familiar county where Pine Creek sat nestled among farmland and small forests, David wondered if that had been the right decision. Would a surprise be too shocking after all this time? Should he have prepared her with phone calls, with gradual reintroductions? Too late now. The bus was pulling into the Pine Creek station, a small brick building that hadn't changed a bit since he'd left. David gathered his duffel bag and the wooden box he'd spent months carving in his spare time. A jewelry box for Lily, with her name engraved on the lid and small compartments inside for treasures. He'd filled it with mementos from his time away: a perfect pine cone from the mountains, a smooth stone from a river, a pressed wildflower from a meadow near one of his work sites, a tiny silver horse from a gift shop in a town whose name he'd forgotten. Each item had a story he hoped to share with her. The town itself had changed more than the bus station. As David walked down Main Street toward the residential area where Tom and Betty lived, he noticed new storefronts, a renovated park, and a coffee shop where the old hardware store his former workplace used to be. Change was inevitable, he supposed. Nothing and no one stayed the same. David had rented a small apartment on the edge of town, sight unseen, but he wasn't heading there yet. His feet carried him along the familiar route to his in-laws' house, his heart pounding harder with each step. He'd showered and changed at his last layover, wanting to look presentable, but now he worried about his appearance. Would Lily recognize him? His hair was shorter, his face more weathered from years working outdoors, his frame more muscular from physical labor. Turning onto Maple Street, David saw the house in the distance, the tidy brick home with white trim and the picket fence he'd helped Tom repair the summer before he left. The flower garden along the front path was in full bloom, bursting with colors that reminded David of the drawings Lily used to make, all bright yellows and pinks and purples without regard for realistic shading. As he approached, David noticed someone sitting under the large oak tree in the side yard, a small figure bent over a book. Lily. His breath caught in his throat. He stopped at the gate, suddenly unsure. She hadn't noticed him yet, absorbed in her reading. Her hair, longer than in the photos, fell forward, obscuring her face. She wore jean shorts and a purple t-shirt, her bare feet tucked beneath her. Beside her lay a notebook and colored pencils, perhaps for drawing later. David stood frozen, taking in the sight of his daughter. From this distance, she could still be the 4-year-old he'd left behind, just bigger. But he knew that was an illusion. The child before him was a stranger in many ways, with thoughts and feelings and experiences he knew nothing about. Just as he was gathering courage to open the gate, Lily looked up, perhaps sensing his presence. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other across the yard. David saw confusion in her eyes, then a flicker of recognition, followed by an expression he couldn't quite read. Surprise? Uncertainty? Fear? He raised his hand in an awkward wave, suddenly feeling like a visitor, an outsider at the place his daughter called home. The wooden jewelry box felt heavy in his other hand, the gesture now seeming insufficient for the years lost. Slowly, Lily closed her book and stood up. She didn't run to him as he had both hoped and feared she might. Instead, she called toward the house, "Grandma, someone's here!" The door opened and Betty stepped onto the porch, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun. When she spotted David at the gate, she hurried down the steps and across the yard, reaching him before Lily did. "You're early," she said quietly, tension evident in her voice. "We thought you'd call when you got to town." "I couldn't wait," David admitted, his eyes still fixed on Lily, who stood halfway between the tree and the gate, watching them with wary eyes. Betty turned to her granddaughter. "Lily, look who's here." "It's your dad." Lily nodded slowly. "I know." Her voice was soft, cautious. She took a few steps closer but maintained a distance that felt like more than just the physical space between them. "Hi, Lily Pad," David said, using the nickname automatically. Though he'd promised himself he wouldn't force familiarity she might not feel. A flicker of something, recognition, maybe even the ghost of a smile, crossed her face at the nickname, but it quickly disappeared behind a mask of polite reserve. "Hi," she replied simply. An awkward silence fell over the three of them, broken only by the distant sound of a lawnmower and the cheerful chirping of birds oblivious to the human drama unfolding below. "Why don't we go inside?" Betty suggested, glancing between father and daughter. "Tom's at his doctor appointment, but he'll be back soon. I've got lemonade in the fridge." Lily turned without a word and headed toward the house, picking up her book and supplies on the way. David watched her go, noting the straight line of her back, the deliberate pace of her steps. She moved like someone much older than 9, someone carrying a weight beyond her years. "Give her time," Betty murmured, placing a hand briefly on David's arm. "This is a shock for her." David nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. What had he expected? That she would run into his arms, forgetting the years of absence? That they could simply pick up where they'd left off, as if time hadn't passed? The house was cooler inside, the familiar scent of Betty's potpourri mixing with something baking in the oven. David stood awkwardly in the living room, taking in the changes, new curtains, a different sofa, and everywhere, evidence of Lily's presence, school artwork framed on the walls, a child-sized desk in the corner covered with papers and books, a row of trophies on the mantel that he knew nothing about. Lily had disappeared down the hallway, presumably to her room. Betty busied herself in the kitchen, returning with glasses of lemonade on a tray. "She's been doing so well in school," Betty said, filling the silence as David sat stiffly on the edge of the sofa, top of her class in reading. "And she's quite the artist. Gets that from her mother, I suppose." David flinched slightly at the mention of Lily's mother, his ex-wife who had walked away from both of them years ago. As far as he knew, she'd never tried to contact Lily since leaving. Has there been any word from Rachel?" he asked quietly. Betty shook her head. "Not a card, not a call. It's for the best, I think. Lily doesn't ask about her anymore. But she asks about me," David wanted to say. At least she used to. The thought that his daughter might have stopped wondering about him, stopped missing him, was almost too painful to bear. "I've got a job lined up," David said, changing the subject. "Starting next week at the construction company that's building the new community center. And I found an apartment on Oak Street. It's small, but there's a second bedroom for Lily if she wants to visit." Betty nodded, her expression carefully neutral. "That sounds nice, David. I'm glad you got things sorted out." "I know she can't just come live with me right away," David continued, the words rushing out. "I understand she needs time, but I want to be part of her life again. I want to make up for the time I've been gone." Before Betty could respond, the sound of a door opening down the hall caught their attention. Lily appeared in the doorway, still watching David with those careful, assessing eyes. She'd brushed her hair and changed her shirt, he noticed. Was she trying to look nice for him? The thought gave him a flicker of hope. "I have something for you," David said, holding out the wooden box. "I made it myself." Lily approached slowly and took the box, examining it with curious fingers. When she saw her name carved into the lid, her eyes widened slightly. "Open it," David encouraged. Lily carefully lifted the lid, revealing the compartments inside, each containing a small treasure. She picked up the pine cone first, turning it in her small hand. The following afternoon, David arrived at Tom and Betty's house precisely at 2 o'clock as they had agreed. He'd spent the morning setting up his sparse apartment, hanging the few photos he'd kept with him over the years, and making a quick trip to the grocery store to stock the refrigerator. The second bedroom stood empty except for a bed frame and mattress he'd purchased secondhand. He would let Lily choose the colors, the decorations, if she felt comfortable enough to stay over. He stood on the porch, his hand poised to knock, when the door swung open. Tom stood there, his expression unreadable. "She's almost ready," Tom said, stepping aside to let David in. Betty left a list of her favorite ice cream flavors on the counter. "She's allergic to strawberries now. Developed that about 2 years ago." David nodded, absorbing this new information about his daughter. A strawberry allergy. One more thing he hadn't known. "Thanks for telling me." Tom's expression softened slightly. "Look, David, I know we've had our differences, but we all want what's best for Lily. She's a sensitive kid. Takes things hard." "I understand," David said, though he wasn't sure he did fully understand the girl his daughter had become. "I'm not here to disrupt her life. I just want to be part of it again." Before Tom could respond, Lily appeared in the hallway wearing a yellow sundress and carrying a small purse. Her hair was pulled back with a matching yellow headband, and she looked so grown up that David's breath caught. "You look beautiful, Lily Pad," he said, the nickname still feeling natural on his lips despite everything. A ghost of a smile touched her face, quickly replaced by her now familiar careful expression. "Thank you. I'm ready to go." The walk to the ice cream parlor was quiet, punctuated by David's attempts at conversation that Lily answered with 1 or 2 words. She walked slightly ahead of him, not close enough to hold hands as they once would have, but not so far that it seemed deliberate. "Your grandpa says you're allergic to strawberries now," David said as they approached Main Street. "When did that happen?" When I was 7, Lily replied. My whole face got puffy at my birthday party. We had to go to the hospital. David winced, imagining the scene. Another important moment he'd missed. That must have been scary, Lily shrugged. Grandma was really scared. I got a ride in an ambulance, though. That was kinda cool. David smiled at her attempt to find the positive. Still like chocolate? Chocolate mint, Lily corrected. That's my favorite now. Noted, David said, filing away this new information. Mine too, actually. Lily glanced up at him, a flicker of surprise crossing her face as if she hadn't considered that they might share preferences. It was a small thing, but David felt a tiny spark of connection. The ice cream parlor was new, having replaced the old drugstore on the corner of Main and Elm. Inside, it was bright and cheerful, with checkered floors and red vinyl booths. Several families sat enjoying sundaes and cones, and a group of children about Lily's age clustered around a table in the corner, giggling over towering banana splits. One of the girls spotted Lily and waved enthusiastically. Lily, come sit with us. David saw his daughter hesitate, looking between the group of friends and him. Go ahead, he said, trying to keep the disappointment from his voice. I'll get the ice cream. Chocolate mint, right? Lily nodded but didn't move toward her friends. Instead, she said in a small voice, maybe next time. I'll sit with my dad today. The simple statement, my dad, warmed David more than he could express. He led the way to a booth by the window and they settled in across from each other. A teenage waitress came to take their order. 1 chocolate mint and a waffle cone, David ordered. And I'll have the same. Cup, not cone, Lily corrected quickly. I don't like the cone anymore. It gets too drippy. Cup for the young lady, the waitress amended with a smile. Be right back. When she'd gone, David tried again to bridge the gap between them. So your grandma tells me you're quite the artist. Lily nodded, her fingers tracing patterns on the tabletop. I like drawing. And painting sometimes. What do you like to draw? She considered this for a moment. Animals mostly. And landscapes. Mrs. Patterson, she's my art teacher, says I have a good eye for detail. David seized on this thread. I'd love to see your artwork sometime. Maybe you could show me your sketchbook. Maybe, Lily said non-committal. Then unexpectedly she asked, Did you really make that box yourself? The one with my name on it. David nodded. I did. I learned woodworking from one of the guys on the construction site. He taught me during lunch breaks, started with simple things like spoons and bowls, worked my way up to the box, took months to get it right. Their ice cream arrived, momentarily pausing the conversation. David watched as Lily carefully ate her first spoonful, closing her eyes briefly as she tasted it. It was such a familiar gesture. She'd always done that with foods she particularly enjoyed, even as a toddler. It's good, she said, opening her eyes to find him watching her. What? Nothing, David said quickly. Just remembering how you used to do that when you were little. Close your eyes when you ate something you liked. I still do, Lily admitted. Grandpa says it's because I'm savoring the moment. Smart man, your grandpa. Lily's expression grew more serious. Why did you stay away so long? The question came suddenly, bluntly, catching David off guard. You said just until Christmas. Then you said my birthday. Then you just stayed gone. David put down his spoon, the ice cream forgotten. This was the real conversation, the one that had been waiting beneath the surface pleasantries. He owed her honesty. I never meant to be away for so long, he began, choosing his words carefully. At first I really thought it would just be a few months. But then the job got extended and I was making good money we needed. And then I got promoted and I thought, just a little longer and I'll have enough saved to really take care of us. But we were okay at Grandma and Grandpa's, Lily said, her voice smaller now. I didn't need a lot of money. I needed you. The simple truth of it hit David like a physical blow. You're right, he acknowledged, his voice rough with emotion. I got it wrong. I thought I was doing the best thing for you by providing financially, but I missed what was really important. Lily stirred her ice cream, not looking at him. Sometimes I thought maybe you didn't want to come back, that maybe you had a new family somewhere else like Mom did. No, David said firmly. Never. There has never been a day I didn't think about you, miss you, wish I was with you. I made a mistake, Lily, a big one. I can't get those years back, but I'm here now and I'm not going anywhere ever again. Lily raised her eyes to his. studying his face as if searching for the truth in his words. "Promise?" "I promise," David said, meaning it more than any promise he'd ever made. "I've taken a permanent job here in town. I've got an apartment with a room just for you. I'm staying, Lilypad, for good." She nodded slowly, seeming to accept his words, if not fully believe them yet. Trust, once broken, wasn't easily repaired. David knew he had years of proving himself ahead. "Can I ask you something else?" Lily said after a moment. "Anything. The teddy bear I gave you when you left. Do you still have it?" David smiled, reaching into his jacket pocket and pulling out the worn, bedraggled bear. "Benny hasn't left my side since the day you gave him to me. He's been to Wyoming and back." For the first time, a genuine smile spread across Lily's face. "He looks terrible," she said with a small laugh. "Well, he's been working hard keeping me company," David replied, delighted by her smile. "I think he's earned his retirement." Lily reached across the table and took the bear, examining him with gentle fingers. "His ear's coming off," she observed. "Think we can fix him up?" "Grandma has a sewing kit," Lily offered. "We could do it together, if you want." "I'd like that very much," David said, hope blooming in his chest. It was a small thing, mending a teddy bear. But it was a start. Something they could do together. A shared task. A reason to spend more time in each other's company. As they finished their ice cream, the conversation flowed a little easier. Lily told him about her school, her best friend Ava, her favorite teacher Mr. Cooper, who let them do science experiments every Friday. David listened hungrily, soaking up these details of his daughter's life, asking questions that showed he was truly interested, storing away every piece of information like treasures. On the walk back to Tom and Betty's house, Lily walked a little closer to him than before, not holding hands, not yet, but the distance between them had narrowed just a bit. "Would you like to come see my apartment sometime?" David asked as they approached the white picket fence. "You could help me decide what color to paint your room there." Lily considered this, her brow furrowing slightly. "Maybe next week? After I see how my math test goes on Friday. I've been studying really hard." "It's a date," David agreed, recognizing that she was setting boundaries, creating conditions that made her feel safe. "I bet you'll ace that test." At the front gate, David stopped, not wanting to intrude by going inside. "Thank you for coming with me today, Lily. It meant a lot to me." Lily nodded, twisting the strap of her purse between her fingers. "It was okay," she said, which from a 9-year-old was high praise indeed. Then, surprising them both, she took a quick step forward and wrapped her arms around his waist in a brief, tight hug before darting through the gate and up the path to the H. Summer faded into autumn, and with the changing leaves came gradual changes in David and Lily's relationship. Sunday dinners at Tom and Betty's house became a regular event, followed by board games or movies that often left them all laughing together. Weekday visits grew more frequent, with David sometimes picking Lily up from school and taking her for hot chocolate at the cafe on Main Street, where she would excitedly tell him about her day. The first time Lily came to visit David's apartment, she stood in the doorway of the empty second bedroom, her eyes wide with possibility. "It's all yours," David told her. "We can paint it any color you want, get furniture you like. Make it really feel like your space." Lily walked slowly around the room, touching the bare walls, looking out the window that overlooked a small park across the street. "Could it be purple?" she asked tentatively. "Not dark purple. Kind of a lavender?" "Absolutely," David agreed. "I'll get paint samples tomorrow." The following weekend, they transformed the room together, David teaching Lily how to use a roller without dripping, Lily showing surprising patience with the detailed work around the window frames. Tom helped them assemble a white desk and bookshelf they'd found at a secondhand store, while Betty arrived with curtains she'd sewn from fabric Lily had chosen. By Sunday evening, the room was complete, lavender walls, white furniture, and a colorful rug that tied it all together. Lily stood in the middle, spinning around to take it all in. "What do you think?" David asked, watching her reaction carefully. "Is it how you imagined?" Lily nodded, her expression serious as she considered the space. "It's perfect. Can I bring some of my books and stuff next time I come?" "Of course," David said, his heart lifting at the implication that there would be a next time that she was beginning to claim this space as her own. "Anything you want." That night, after Tom and Betty had taken Lily home, David sat alone in the purple room, looking at the empty shelves and bare desk. Progress was happening in small, careful steps. Not the headlong rush of reconciliation he'd initially hoped for, but something more measured and perhaps more lasting. October brought parent-teacher conferences at Lily's school. David had asked Betty if he could attend, and to his relief she'd agreed, suggesting they all go together to show Lily they were a united front in supporting her education. "Mr. Cooper says I have a real aptitude for science," Lily informed them proudly as they walked home from the conference, her report card clutched in her hand. "Aptitude," David repeated with a smile. "That's a big word." "It means I'm good at it," Lily explained, rolling her eyes in the way only a 9-year-old can. "We're doing a project on ecosystems next month. I'm going to make a diorama of the forest." "I could help with that," David offered, careful not to overstep. "I've got some scrap wood that would make a good base." "Okay," Lily agreed easily. "I can work on it at your place on Saturday." These casual acceptances, these small inclusions in her life, meant everything to David. Each one was a step toward rebuilding what had been broken. The first real test came in November, when David's boss asked him to oversee a 3-day project in the next county. It would mean 3 nights away, nothing compared to the years he'd been gone, but potentially triggering for Lily nonetheless. "I don't have to go," David told her as they worked on her science diorama at his kitchen table, carefully gluing tiny paper leaves onto twigs to create miniature trees. "I can ask someone else to handle it." Lily concentrated on her task, not looking up. "When would you leave?" "Monday morning. I'd be back Thursday night." She was quiet for a long moment, her fingers working methodically on the leaves. "That's only 3 days," she finally said. "And you'll come back on Thursday? Promise?" "I promise," David said, his voice firm. "Wild horses couldn't keep me away." Lily looked up then, her eyes serious. "You can go, but you have to call every night. And maybe you could take Benny with you, so you won't be lonely." David felt a lump form in his throat. The teddy bear had resumed its place in Lily's room at Tom and Betty's house, carefully propped against her pillow each morning when she made her bed. That she would entrust him with it again was a gesture of trust he hadn't expected. "I'd be honored to have Benny's company," he said, keeping his tone light despite the emotion welling up inside. The 3 days away were the longest of David's life. Not because of the work, which was straightforward, but because of the constant awareness of his promise to return. He called Lily each evening as promised, listening to her recount her day in increasingly animated detail. On the 3rd night, she fell asleep while still on the phone, the soft sound of her breathing coming through the line as Betty gently took the phone from her. "She's been counting down the hours until you get back," Betty told him. Tom hung a special calendar in the kitchen so she could mark off the days. David drove back to Pine Creek on Thursday evening with a mixture of exhaustion and anticipation. He'd promised to come directly to Tom and Betty's house no matter how late he arrived, so Lily could see he'd kept his word. It was nearly 8 o'clock when he pulled into their driveway. Before he could even knock, the door flew open and Lily launched herself into his arms. "You came back," she said against his shoulder. "Just like you said." "Of course I did," David replied, holding her close. "I will always come back to you, Lilypad. Always." That night marked a turning point. The next morning, Lily asked if she could spend the weekend at David's apartment. It would be her first overnight stay, a significant milestone that both excited and terrified him. What if she got homesick? What if he somehow disappointed her? "We'll be fine," Betty assured him as she helped pack Lily's overnight bag. "She's been talking about it all week. And if anything happens, we're just a phone call away." The weekend passed in a blur of simple pleasures, making pancakes together on Saturday morning, visiting the library to check out books, watching a movie with popcorn on the small TV David had recently purchased. Lily arranged her books and treasures on the shelves in her purple room, claiming the space in a way that made it truly hers. On Sunday morning, David woke early to find Lily already up, sitting at the kitchen table with a serious expression. "Everything okay?" he asked, immediately concerned. Lily nodded. "I've been thinking about something. Could I ask you a question?" "Anything," David said, sitting down across from her. "Would it be okay if I stayed here more often? Not all the time, because I don't want to leave Grandma and Grandpa alone too much, but maybe a few days every week?" David felt his heart might burst with happiness, but he kept his voice calm, recognizing the importance of the moment. "I would like that very much." But we should talk to Grandma and Grandpa about it too. Make sure everyone's comfortable with the arrangement. Lily nodded, seeming relieved by his response. I think they'll be okay with it. Grandma said something about how it's good for dads and daughters to have time together. Later that day, over Sunday dinner, they broached the subject with Tom and Betty. To David's surprise, Tom was the first to voice his support. We've been talking about this for a while, he admitted, glancing at his wife. Lily belongs with her father. We've just been waiting for you both to be ready. I'm not suggesting anything drastic, David clarified quickly. Maybe she could stay with me on weekends to start. Then we can see how it goes. Or I could stay at Dad's on school nights too, Lily suggested, her voice stronger and more confident than David had heard before. Since his apartment is actually closer to school, I could walk from there. The adults exchanged surprised looks at Lily's eagerness. Betty reached over and squeezed her granddaughter's hand. How about we start with weekends and one school night a week? Then we can add more days as we go. Lily seemed satisfied with this compromise, and the conversation moved on to logistics, which clothes would stay at which house, how they would handle homework, who would take her to her after-school activities. David listened, amazed at how quickly this hypothetical situation was becoming reality. As autumn deepened toward winter, the new arrangement took shape. Lily stayed with David on Fridays and Saturdays plus Wednesday nights. Her purple room filled with books, clothes, and treasures. She hung artwork on the walls and arranged seashells on the windowsill. The apartment, once bare and impersonal, became a home. December brought the one-year anniversary of David's return. Neither of them mentioned it directly, but David noticed Lily being especially affectionate that week, sitting close to him on the sofa as they watched TV, asking more questions about his work, his childhood, his interests. Dad, she said one evening as he tucked her into bed in the purple room, I'm glad you came back. Me too, Lily pad, David replied, his voice thick with emotion. It was the best decision I ever made. Christmas approached, and with it came the inevitable memories of all the Christmases David had missed. He threw himself into creating new traditions, taking Lily to pick out a tree for his apartment, helping her bake cookies for her class party, spending one memorable evening stringing popcorn garlands that ended up more on the floor than on the thread. Tom and Betty invited David to join them for Christmas Eve and Christmas morning, a gesture that moved him deeply. As they all sat around the tree on Christmas Eve, drinking hot chocolate and listening to carols, David watched his daughter's face in the glow of the Christmas.